All right, welcome to this deep dive. We've got a wild mix of stuff to unpack here: gene editing, brain-computer interfaces, and super soldiers.
Wow. It's interesting, we've got some pretty standard science reporting here. We've got ethical debates too, of course, but we've also got some hints at what's already going on, with the world's militaries. It's like we're getting a sneak peek at a potential future.
And maybe not such a comfortable one, right?
Right, exactly.
So in this deep dive, I think what we're going to try and understand is not just how these technologies work, but what they could actually mean for us, for humanity.
No pressure, right?
No pressure at all.
Let's start with CRISPR. I think most people have at least heard of CRISPR at this point, but maybe not the whole story.
Yeah, CRISPR is definitely getting a lot of buzz, and deservedly so. It's a pretty new gene editing tool based on a system originally found in bacteria, but the potential applications, they're mind-boggling to say the least. We're talking about the potential to cure genetic diseases, create entirely new types of crops, and maybe even enhance human capabilities. Okay, so how does it actually work? Don't dumb it down too much for me. I did do a little reading before sending these over to you.
All right, all right. Well, imagine you have a giant text document, right? And you need to find a specific word and replace it with another word. That's basically what CRISPR allows scientists to do, but with DNA. They can target a specific gene and either remove it, replace it, or even insert a brand new gene altogether.
So it's like having this molecular scalpel
Exactly.
that can just cut and paste the very building blocks of life.
Yes.
What are some of the most promising applications that are being explored right now?
Well, one area that's generating a lot of excitement is the potential to actually cure genetic diseases.
Hmm.
Things like sickle cell anemia, cystic fibrosis. These are conditions that are caused by a single defective gene. So theoretically, CRISPR could be used to go in and fix that gene and potentially cure the disease.
That's incredible. And I know there's been a lot of talk about using CRISPR to create these disease-resistant crops, maybe even save some species from going extinct. I think I saw something about bananas.
You're right, you're right. The Cavendish banana, the one you usually find in supermarkets, it's actually under threat
Hmm.
from this deadly fungus called tropical race 4.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and because Cavendish bananas are all genetically identical, they're extremely vulnerable. Gene editing could create a resistant variety and maybe save the Cavendish banana from extinction.
That's amazing, but also kind of scary, right?
How so?
What if we end up with a world where every banana is exactly the same? Wouldn't that make them even more susceptible to new threats?
You're absolutely right. When you have a monoculture where every single banana is identical, that means one single disease or pest could wipe out the entire population. And that is one of the potential downsides of relying too heavily on genetic engineering.
Okay, so it's not all sunshine and roses. There are some serious risks we need to think about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest ethical concerns with CRISPR is, well, the potential for creating designer babies,
Ooh, yeah.
right? Imagine parents being able to choose their child's eye color, height, maybe even their intelligence.
Yeah, that's where things get really ethically murky for me. I know we already have examples of genetic selection with IVF, but gene editing seems like a whole other level.
It is. It is. But it's important to remember that even with existing technologies like IVS, there are ethical dilemmas that we're already facing. For instance, there was a case back in 2000, Adam Nash. He was conceived specifically through IVS and genetic selection, but to be a donor match for his sister Molly. She had a condition called Fanconi anemia, and his stem cells are actually used to successfully treat her.
Right, right. The savior sibling. I remember reading about that. It's a fascinating story. But it really makes you think, what if parents start feeling pressured to have a designer baby just to save a sick child?
It's a very valid concern. And it's one of many ethical dilemmas we have to grapple with, especially as gene editing technology keeps getting more sophisticated and more accessible.
It seems like the more we learn about CRISPR, the more questions it raises. And we haven't even gotten to the whole super soldier thing yet.
Right, we're just getting started. Speaking of pushing boundaries, let's move on to brain-computer interfaces. We usually call them BCIs.
BCIs.
BCIs, yeah. This is where things get really mind-bending. We've got some sources here talking about chips implanted directly into the brain, but then other sources talking about less invasive approaches, like EEG caps.
So what can people actually do with these things?
Well, the basic idea is to allow the brain to communicate directly with a computer. Imagine a paralyzed person being able to control a prosthetic limb with just their thoughts, or type an email.
I was reading about this Australian guy, Graham Felsted. He's got ALS, and he's using a BCI to communicate and browse the internet. all with his mind. That's pretty amazing.
It is. And those are just the early applications. Imagine the potential for people with disabilities, but also for healthy people who just want to enhance their abilities. What if you could learn a new language overnight or download information directly into your brain?
Okay, now you're talking straight up science fiction, but I mean, seriously, is that even remotely possible?
It's definitely within the realm of possibility. Of course, there are huge ethical concerns to consider. For example, what happens to privacy when companies can potentially access our thoughts? What about the potential for manipulation? Could BCIs be used to control people's behavior, maybe even turn them into weapons?
Oh, okay, that's getting a little unsettling. But I mean, it's not like governments and corporations aren't already trying to influence our thoughts and behaviors in a million other ways, right?
That's true, that's true. But with BCIs, we're talking about a whole new level of access to our inner world. It really raises some profound questions about what it means to be human in a world where our thoughts can be read and potentially manipulated by machines.
It's almost like we're facing a choice. Like, we can embrace these technologies and risk losing some fundamental part of what it means to be human. Or, we reject them and potentially miss out on incredible benefits.
It's a difficult balance to strike,
Yeah.
and it's a conversation that we absolutely need to have as a society because these technologies are coming whether we like it or not.
Well, before we get too deep into an existential crisis, you mentioned something about super soldiers before. I've got some sources here that suggest that this isn't just, a comic book fantasy.
Right. We've talked about manipulating genes and merging minds with machines.
Yeah.
But what happens when you combine those technologies in the pursuit of, let's say, military advantage? That's where the super soldier comes in.
So is this real? Or are we talking conspiracy theories here?
I don't think we could just dismiss it as fantasy anymore.
Hmm.
There are credible reports that various militaries around the world are actively exploring these technologies. And some of the potential applications are, well, they're pretty unsettling.
Okay, I'm officially intrigued. So when we talk about super soldiers, what are we actually talking about? Genetically modified warriors, cyborg soldiers with implanted weapons.
It's probably a combination of both. On the gene editing front, we've already seen examples like the extramuscular beagle Hercules. If we can enhance animals in that way, it's not a big leap to imagine applying similar techniques to humans.
So we could potentially create soldiers who are stronger, faster, more resilient than any human who's ever existed.
Exactly. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Imagine soldiers who can see in the dark, hold their breath for hours, or even resist the effects of biological weapons.
Okay, this is getting a little too sci-fi for me, but I have to admit it's also fascinating.
It's definitely both. And it raises some really profound ethical questions. Are we comfortable with the idea of creating a class of superhumans who are genetically engineered for war? What are the implications for society, for warfare, for the future of our species?
Yeah, those are some really heavy questions, and we're just scratching the surface here. We haven't even talked about the potential for brain-computer interfaces to create soldiers who are mentally controlled or enhanced, or, the development of autonomous weapons systems that can basically make life or death decisions without any human intervention.
It's a complex landscape, and it's changing so rapidly. It's essential that we start having these conversations now before these technologies outpace our ability to control them.
Well, I think we've given our listener plenty to think about for now. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of gene editing, brain-computer interfaces, and the quest for the super soldier.
Yes, we really were just starting to sort of explore the possibility of super soldiers last time.
Right.
It really does blur the lines between science fiction and reality, and it raises so many questions, ethically, I think.
Yeah, definitely. We were talking about using gene editing to create soldiers with, enhanced physical abilities, strength, speed, resilience. But ethically, are we comfortable with that? I mean, are we really okay with the idea of literally designing humans for war?
It's something we have to consider, and it's a concern that's been explored a lot,
Mhm.
in science fiction in particular. But the thing is, as these technologies keep getting more powerful, more accessible, we have to grapple with it in the real world, too. And I think it really challenges how we understand what it means to be human.
Right, because where does it stop, right? If we can manipulate genes to create these super soldiers, what's to stop us from creating a society where only the genetically enhanced people have access to certain jobs or even certain rights?
It's a slippery slope, no doubt.
Yeah.
And we need to be really, really careful about how we navigate this. Imagine a world where your genes determine your entire destiny. That's a dystopian scenario we have to try to avoid.
Totally. So gene editing is like one piece of this super soldier puzzle. What about the brain-computer interface stuff? We talked about how it can help people with disabilities, but could it also enhance like cognitive abilities in soldiers?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine soldiers who can process information faster, make decisions more quickly, and even resist things like psychological warfare. It's all possible with BCIs.
But wouldn't that just create like a mental arms race? If one
Right.
country starts developing soldiers with enhanced cognitive abilities, wouldn't other countries have to do the same?
It's definitely a danger, and this is why things like international cooperation and arms control agreements are more important now than ever. We need to have a global conversation, about the ethical implications of all this before it just becomes so widespread that it's too late.
I agree. But even if we do somehow control how these technologies spread, there's still that question of who gets to decide how they're used, right? Is it governments? Is it corporations? Is it individuals?
It's complicated, right?
Yeah.
Ideally, it should be something democratic, something where citizens have a say in how powerful technologies are developed and used. But in reality, it'll probably be a lot messier than that. You're going to have different groups competing for control.
It all feels very unpredictable to me and a little scary.
That's understandable. I think these technologies could completely alter warfare as we know it,
Mm.
even the nature of humanity itself.
Mm.
We're in uncharted territory, and we've got to be careful.
I've also been thinking about the potential psychological effects on the soldiers themselves. Like, if you're genetically and mentally engineered to be this perfect killing machine, what does that do to you?
That's an important point. And honestly, it's one that's often kind of overlooked in all the excitement about how amazing the technology is.
Mhm.
Imagine the pressure of being designed for war, having your entire identity shaped by what other people expect of you. It could lead to all sorts of issues, right?
Yeah.
PTSD, a complete loss of sense of self.
It makes you wonder if the quest for the super soldier, it's dehumanizing, even for the soldiers themselves. Are we creating monsters in the name of national security?
It's a risk we can't ignore. And it really highlights how important it is not to just enhance physical and cognitive abilities, but ethical and psychological resilience too.
So it's not just about creating super soldiers, it's about creating ethical super soldiers.
Exactly. We
Wow.
need to move beyond that traditional model of military training that just emphasizes obedience and aggression.
Right.
We need to train soldiers to think critically, to be able to make ethical judgments, and to truly understand, the human cost of war.
That sounds incredibly difficult, though, right? Especially given the environment of the military. But I guess wouldn't it actually be more effective in the long run if our soldiers were trained that way?
I think so.
Hmm.
Soldiers who can actually think critically and make ethical decisions on their own, well, they're less likely to commit war crimes
Mm.
or even to suffer psychological damage from the horrors of combat. Plus, they're going to be better at adapting to complex situations.
Makes sense. Let's shift gears for a second, though, and talk about another aspect of this. Artificial intelligence. We touched on it a little bit, but I think it deserves a deeper dive.
It does, because AI is evolving so quickly, and it already has such a big impact on warfare. Just look at autonomous weapons, drones, cyber warfare.
Right. And some of what I'm reading suggests that AI could actually become better than humans at warfare.
Yeah.
We could have these AI-powered robots, algorithms that can fight more efficiently and more ruthlessly than any human soldier ever could.
That's definitely something that's being explored by militaries across the world. And it's another huge ethical dilemma. Who's responsible, for example, when an autonomous weapons system makes a mistake and kills innocent civilians?
It's terrifying to think about. Are we headed towards a future where wars are just fought by machines, no humans involved at all?
It's a possibility, and we need to take it seriously.
Yeah.
It highlights the need for ethical guidelines when it comes to AI and warfare.
Yeah.
We need to make sure there's human control, human oversight, even as AI systems get more and more sophisticated.
But how do you control something that might be more intelligent than you are?
It's a great question, and it's one that philosophers and scientists are really struggling with right now. One idea is to build AI systems with some kind of ethical constraints built right in,
Okay.
so that even if they do become more intelligent than humans, they're still bound by moral principles.
So it's like building an artificial conscience for these AI systems. Is that even possible?
It's definitely a challenge, but some researchers think it is. They're looking at ways to teach AI systems about things like human values, ethics, even the laws of war. It's early days, but a lot of people are paying attention to this.
It's mind-boggling to think that we might be on the verge of creating machines that can think ethically. But I guess that's the whole point of this deep dive, right? We're exploring these boundaries.
Exactly. This isn't just abstract stuff. These are real challenges, real-world stuff that we're going to have to face. And the choices we make now are going to determine the future. The future of war, the future of humanity, maybe even the future of intelligence itself.
I think we've given our listener a lot to digest here. We'll be back for part 3 to keep going. And we'll look at some potential solutions, some strategies for navigating all of this.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. In parts 1 and 2, we really got into gene editing, brain-computer interfaces, and that whole quest for the super soldier. It's a lot, I know. But it's important stuff, right?
It is. It really is. These technologies could completely change the world as we know it, and we've got to be ready. For the challenges, but for the opportunities too, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I keep coming back to is this idea of ethical super soldiers. Is that even really possible? Can you actually create soldiers who are not just physically, mentally enhanced, but ethically, superior?
It's a question that's fascinated people for a long time, and it gets at the core of what it means to be human,
Yeah.
Can we really use technology to not only make ourselves physically stronger, smarter, but also more moral? I'm not sure. Part of me can see the good. It would be amazing to have soldiers who make the right decisions, even when they're in the middle of a battle. But the other part of me worries about creating a whole class of superhumans who think they're above the law,
Right, and that's where the focus on ethical training comes in. It has to go hand in hand with all the technological advancements. It's not enough to just have soldiers who are strong and fast and smart.
Yeah.
You have to instill in them a deep understanding of what's right, what's wrong, the laws of war, the importance of human dignity. They need to know the consequences of what they do.
So we're talking about a totally new kind of warrior then. One that's not just better physically and mentally, but ethically grounded too.
Exactly. We can't rely on the old ways of doing things.
Right.
The traditional military training that often emphasizes blind obedience and aggression.
Right.
We have to do better than that. We have to train soldiers to think critically, to actually make judgments about what's ethical,
Yeah.
and to really grasp the human cost of war.
But how do you teach ethics in that kind of environment?
It's not easy.
War is all about violence, and things aren't always clear-cut.
No, they're not. But I do think it's possible. We have to expose soldiers to different ethical frameworks, engage them in scenarios that challenge their moral reasoning, and really encourage them to develop their own codes of conduct.
It's like creating a more introspective kind of soldier, I guess.
Yeah.
Someone who's more self-aware. But, can that really work in the military? Everything is so high pressure.
I think not only can it work, it has to work for the well-being of the soldiers themselves and for the societies they're serving. Look, soldiers who are ethically grounded are much less likely to do terrible things, and they're less likely to be traumatized morally by what they see and do in combat. Plus, they're going to be seen as more legitimate, more trustworthy by the people they're interacting with.
Okay, I see what you mean, but let's zoom out for a second.
Okay.
Even if we manage to create these ethical super soldiers, they're still operating in a system that's driven by politics, by economics.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Creating ethical super soldiers, that's just one piece. We have to look at the bigger picture, too, like what causes war in the first place.
So we're talking poverty, inequality, political instability, the whole arms trade thing.
Exactly. These are all connected, and they're complicated. There's no easy fix. It's going to take a lot of different approaches. Diplomacy, conflict resolution, sustainable development, global cooperation.
Yeah, it feels like a pretty tall order, and it makes you think, is technology actually part of the problem or part of the solution?
I think it can be both, honestly. We can use it to make weapons even more destructive. We can use it in ways that make inequality even worse. But we can also use it to promote peace, help people understand each other better, and work together more effectively. It all comes down to the choices we make, how we decide to use it.
So that brings us back to why we're having these conversations in the first place, right? It's about raising awareness, making sure people know about all this, and then demanding that these technologies are used in a way that's ethical and responsible.
I couldn't agree more. We need to move past the hype and the fear and really have an open, honest conversation about how these technologies might impact the world.
So where do we go from here? What can our listener do to be a part of this? How can they help shape the future?
Well, there's a lot we can all do. We can educate ourselves, first of all. Talk to our friends and families about this stuff. We can reach out to our elected officials, too, and support the organizations that are doing good work, trying to promote ethical and responsible innovation.
So it sounds like everyone has a part to play in this.
Everyone. And we have to start by recognizing that these aren't just technological problems, they're human problems. And they require human solutions. Our values, our ethics, our compassion, all of that needs to be part of the equation as we figure all this out.
This deep dive has been intense, I'll be honest, but it's
Yeah.
really made me think. We started with gene editing, something so tiny, and now we're talking about brain-computer interfaces and super soldiers. And it all comes back to this one question. What kind of future do we actually want?
That's it, isn't it? And the best part is that future is still being written. It's up to all of us to decide what role these technologies are going to play in our lives and in the world we leave behind for everyone who comes after us.
That's a pretty powerful thought to end on. I know we've only scratched the surface here, but I hope this has given you, the listener, some things to consider and maybe even inspired you to get involved. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us.